I know it's maybe a big conversation.
You take it as God.
Like you're the God, the creator of the universe. You created me, and so save me from the trouble that I have, and give me this, give me that, assist me. Yeah.
Probably first off, I was around before it, so I know that it didn't make me.
Okay. So
it's probably a good one.
So
to
you
start.
probably know it has its own beginning.
Yeah.
So anything that has a beginning must have been contingent on something else, isn't it? It's dependent on something else to be brought into existence.
Makes sense.
So it is not independent. And being one with the beginning, it's not eternal. So it's not eternal, it's not independent, and not having those properties, that means the properties that it was given will be limited. So it would not be omnipotent, it will not be all powerful. Yeah? And it will not be all knowledgeable either, because this is something that whatever we've given it, when you say knowledge, like you can have a phone doing something specifically when you program it, that's all it has.
Yeah.
So the only being that is worthy of worship, we will say, is a maximally perfect being, who is eternal with no beginning, everlasting with no end, who must be self-sufficient, who must be independent, who must be all-powerful, who must be all-knowing, who must be not caused by anything, not preceded, not brought into existence.
Do you accept that? Do you accept this?
Yeah,
So that is the foundation message of Islam, where this is who God is in His character, in His attribute, and that is the being God is asking us to worship, without worshipping anything else of the creation. That people may say, oh, worship this man, or this woman, or this elephant, or monkey, or this bicycle, maybe.
Yeah.
You'll be surprised, some people might just say, oh, looks like my God, this.
It's easy to catch
it's like
yourself,
an avatar.
right? And you realise, oh wait, I've accidentally been.
Have you not seen on the papers, there was a traffic sign in the States which is shaped like Shiva Lingam. Okay,
Sorry.
Shiva is a male deity, and
is
of
it
course,
the elephant one?
yeah.
Sorry if
No,
that's
no,
wrong,
no.
I didn't mean
It's just male. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, and of course, as a male deity, of course, he's got private parts, and this lingam is that private part, and it looks like that. So they took that because it was put on a park, and they started now saying, okay, this is Shiva Lingam, and started worshipping it.
Okay.
This is happening today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that people might do that, but that's why I said, as a rational human being, reasonable human being, we would not worship something like that. We would say, who deserves our worship? Yeah. And the only being deserves the worship are the characteristics. These are essential qualities that I've just given you, at least 4 here, what is needed for a maximally perfect God.
Okay.
Now, if you were to examine the concept of deities or gods around different religions, and you examine based on that, you will find that they don't all fulfill these conditions. Okay? If it does in one of them, then you say at least potentially that is one worthy of looking into. Like, for example, in Christianity, Christian gentlemen here, the Father within the Trinitarian belief system is the fountainhead of everything, who is uncaused, who is eternal with no beginning, who is independent. Well, some say he's not, some say he's interdependent, and he's eternal and omnipotent, omniscient and omnipotent and eternal.
Okay.
But if they bring another condition saying he's actually interdependent on the Son to get rid of this problem of tritheism, then he doesn't fit in this perfect being, because interdependent means he's dependent on someone else who depends on him too. For example, I am dependent on you and you are dependent on me. That's interdependency.
Okay.
And
what do you mean by dependent?
They say they depend on each other for their being. So imagine now, for the existence of God, the Father, he's dependent on the Son, and the Son is dependent on the Father. And you know both of them doesn't make any sense. You can't be interdependent likewise. You have to be totally self-sufficient if you are going to be called
That
God.
would be 3 gods. We don't believe in 3 gods. We believe in one God.
So,
Yeah, we believe in
here,
one
you see what I'm
God.
getting at.
Yeah,
So you mean-
So we believe in one God.
By dependent, you mean one made the other.
For example, I am fully dependent on my Creator, because at one point I didn't exist. So I'm dependent on my Creator for my existence. Not only that, for my continuation of my existence. The way I subsist, I don't subsist self-subsisting. I am dependent on food and water and
When you're
air.
a baby, you're dependent on your mum.
Exactly. So as you can see, I'm fully dependent on someone else.
Yeah.
God, a being who is worthy of worship, is totally self-sufficient. Has to be. Otherwise, he's not maximally perfect. He's not worthy of worship. Someone else is greater than him. Who?
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
Right. So when it comes to, because there are Christian gentlemen, I'm bringing this example, within the Trinitarian concept, the Son, for example, is begotten, or proceeds, or generated from the Father. So this action of proceeding, begetting, generating, is an action of dependency on the Father.
Well, yeah, like when he's born, they say that
No,
the Father made him,
eternal.
We agreed before, if you remember, that there is the characteristics of the divine. It has to be all powerful, all knowing,
I get that,
and it has to be sufficient, meaning self-sufficient. It does not depend on no one, and everything is depending on him. Simple as that. Meaning, if there is one of these conditions breaks, that means there is an issue with the divinity of this issue. That's why we said to you about the so the point is, if I wanted to discuss, for example, to say, are you depending on this bike in terms of, which means that this bike created you? Yeah, the other way around. That's the point. So that's why when he said to you before, if the divine, if you attribute the divine that is dependent on something, that you can lose the definition of the divine, meaning it cannot be any more divine. That's simple as that. So that's why when we say to you, it has to be sufficient, meaning depending on nothing. Except, that's the point. So then in that case, it will fulfill the condition is all powerful. And it will fulfill, it has a will. This divine has a will to decide things, meaning there is no one above him in terms of bureaucracy to tell him what he should do and what he should do. You understand? So now he will fulfill it.
So, see, some people say, who defines this? These are characteristics that all intuitively and rationally can
It makes sense to me. It makes sense to me.
Exactly.
So like, when Jesus was born, like that came from the Father, right? That's what was written in the Bible.
But some might say, even before the creation of the universe, the Son, God the Son existed, and He was eternally begotten. But eternally begotten is an action of begetting. So this action is eternally dependent on the Father. Even worse, eternally dependent on the Father.
Say that again.
The action of begetting to take place to differentiate between the Father and the Son. Because if there is a difference between the Father and the Son, and the difference arose due to begetting, one beget the other. But they say this is atemporal begetting. Time wasn't involved. So it's not like, because if you have a time involved, you immediately know the one who is begotten is totally contingent on the Father, totally dependent on the Father. So the way they move around this problem, they say, look, there was no time involved, it's atemporal, eternally begotten. But the problem still subsides. The action of begetting happened.
Why is that wrong?
Because it's an action. Eternal dependency.
Yeah.
So now you have a being or a person or an entity who is eternally dependent. Any being who is dependent, partially, eternally, for a limited time or all the time, is not the definition of...
According to who? According to who?
Anyone with rational inquiry.
That's according to Islamic theologians.
No, okay, let's start again.
Wait. That's not according to the most reputable philosophers of religion in
Let's start again.
They disagree with that completely.
And this is the Christian bias comes in, because they know the second person of the Trinity does not fulfill a maximally perfect being.
Yes, it does.
The third one does.
No, second and the third don't.
Both of the second
They both don't.
Jesus and the Holy Spirit
They don't. And that is why the Christian philosophers today trying to somehow
Christian
get away.
Philosophers
Okay, let me ask you again. Do you think a being that is dependent can be called maximally perfect?
Yes.
How?
Also, you're conflating terms. So we don't think that Jesus is a
I'm
being.
talking about Jesus.
Well,
I'm talking about Jesus in my time.
I know, but you're missing.
I'm saying a being, so I haven't defined what a being is,
Okay.
neither have I defined a person. You know what perfect is?
Well, I don't know what you're talking about.
Imperfections and weaknesses.
Right, sure.
A being who is dependent on someone or something else, is that a maximally perfect being, or is there a being who is more perfect than that being?
It can be maximally perfect.
So that means, are you
In
saying?
principle, it's not
so
prevented from
let's
being
understand
maximally
that.
perfect by
So
being
let
dependent.
me understand it.
Does it make sense? Does it make what he
I'm
says?
getting lost in it.
Okay.
But you guys carry on.
No, because I want to continue speaking to you. Because we're going to before we continue later, but you can join in.
Yeah, sure. I don't
If you
want to
have a being who is absolute without any deficiencies, and you have a being who has deficiencies and weaknesses, who is more perfect? Exactly. So any being who is dependent and any being who is independent, you know who is perfect and who is not perfect.
It's a fallacy.
The one who is dependent, like your bike, is not more perfect than the creator.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay,
The
yeah.
creator, by definition, God, is independent.
Doesn't that show it?
And the bike is dependent.
No, I'm talking to him.
So how can you say a dependent thing, or an object, or a being, or an entity, or a person, can be likewise the same as an independent being?
Because you circularly presuppose that dependence is a weakness, which you've never substantiated. In your argument, you said, is a weaker being is one that has weaknesses lesser than a one that does not have weaknesses. I agree with that, obviously, of course. The one that has weaknesses is lesser, right? But you're implicitly assuming that dependence is a weakness. I'm asking you now, without circularly presupposing it, substantiate that dependence qua independence.
I think we left that argument last time.
And Philippians 2.
Is a weakness. Wait.
You made your
5 seconds. Not an example of dependence, not a specific example. I mean, dependence in principle is a weakness. There's a huge difference between those two things.
Which philosopher?
Let me tell you something.
Talk about philosophy.
Sure.
Listen, let me tell you something.
Yeah.
Simple thing. We us and you, we agree. Is God all powerful?
Yes. In principle, yes.
What do you mean in principle? Not in everything. So in some other. What do you mean?
No. In principle.
Because I like the things which you say in principle. Really, there are things that He's not all powerful. I'm saying
In principle means that you're talking about the proper philosophical definition of what it means to be
simple
God.
like that. We all agree in the Bible. God is all powerful. Yes. So if you say as all powerful, when you say He's all powerful, can God become not all powerful at certain point?
Yes.
Philippians 2.
That's the point. You see here. That's the point here. You see here.
That's the Christian problem.
That's the question. You see here. When you say, He's not saying like this. They're saying God is all powerful. But sometimes He chooses not to be all powerful.
Can I parody this?
Sometimes He will leave the power and become weak.
Islam has this problem as well. Islam has this problem as well.
Okay, we'll come to Islam. Let's talk about Christianity. So sometimes God will choose not to be all powerful, so He'll become weak. Now sometimes instead of is God almighty, they'll say yes. But Jesus wasn't almighty because He was a human on earth. People, they hit Him, they tortured Him, and according to Him, they killed Him. Meaning He's not all powerful at that point. Adding to this, when we say to them, okay, is God is all knowing? So they say yes, God is all knowing. Now when it comes to Jesus, Jesus is ignorant of certain things, which means He's not all knowing. So there are, in the definition of Jesus to be a divine, that literally all the conditions that even the Christians and the Muslims and everyone, they agree about the definition of divine, they literally will withdraw all of these conditions when it comes to Jesus. You see the point? That shows here, that shows inconsistency in terms of defining the divine. I will ask you, what is the divine?
No, wait.
Do you agree the being is more perfect in the attributes and characteristics, the essential characteristics, one who is
I say we need to quote Philippians 2
or one who is independent?
because that's the answer to the problem.
And more absolute.
So Mom is more perfect than Baby. That's what you're saying.
When it comes to say, you've got two concepts of God. One God relies on someone else to do things. I'm not talking about your God, right? So one God has to do everything that God tells him to. Totally dependent. Takes orders, and in fact, cannot do anything apart from what Allah tells him to do. And the other God is totally sovereign. Does things what he will. Which one do you think is maximally perfect?
We then have two gods. We only have one God.
Which one is maximally perfect?
You've got two gods.
Let's ask this gentleman.
Yeah. We only have one God.
The one who is sovereign.
Even your intuition will tell you the one who is sovereign.
Can you not have
Not the one who is dependent.
Yes.
So, I don't need to go to a critical scholar saying, no, this bike can be equally perfect with an independent creator. I don't need a quotation from an independent scholar or philosopher.
You can't assert something without proof.
I'm sorry, I'm speaking to someone who says it is possible equally that you have this bite which is dependent on the equal footing on someone who's independent.
That's not what I said.
So now, if you have a God, concept of God, in which one God is dependent and the other is not, you would say the one who is dependent cannot be even qualified to be God.
Why?
By definition, God has to be independent.
Why? Why? Prove it.
Oh, okay.
Demonstrated.
Look. I don't need to demonstrate it to you. Look.
And he's relied on it being intuitive from an Islamic paradigm.
He's listening and he can't
No reputable coverage of why he's
You see the problem? He's relying on what? Has to be which reputable philosopher that you have read said God can be dependent?
Then just like that.
And he says God can be dependent. She said God can be dependent.
Yes.
That's the God that I'm going to worship and you're going to worship. And you're not going to worship. You are. No. I agree. So you have a reputable scholar who's repute his question from me. Why? Because you have a scholar who is saying, a God that is dependent like a bike who's dependent is worthy of worship. Look, would you really worship a God? Let me ask you this question. Who is dependent on someone else? Do you think that God is worthy of worship? That God itself is dependent on someone else? But you normally worship. So it's not in any sense a rational human being, reasonable human being, to take a God as God and that being is dependent. Because God, when you say this, if you say God has been given the power, if you give power to someone and they're dependent on someone to give them power, that's what dependency is. So you receive power, you receive authority, you receive knowledge, you are fully dependent on someone else to give you this. That means someone is greater than you. That means dependency. The one who doesn't depend on you is greater than you.
He would have been like read books, human knowledge, human came before him. Surely he's better than them because I know who Einstein is.
When you talk about God, you cannot, remember, how did I start discussing with you? And you consider immediately like how ridiculous it is to worship this guy. And now we went through a process in which we realized the guy cannot be worthy of worship. And we gave reasons. You can work it out. We gave reasons. No, I'm not engaging with you.
Intuition.
Because, I don't consider the way you argue is something beneficial at all. Because what you're saying is, my reputable scholars that I follow says God can be dependent. Any scholar who says God can be dependent is not a scholar of that caliber. I dispute the scholarship. You can get a PhD. Let me tell you something. Do you think it's impossible for me to get a PhD or you to get a PhD for reading your part? Is it really in philosophy?
If you study,
Right. If you study really meticulously and hard, and you're a bright student, you can get a PhD. Right? No problem. I got distinction in masters. I mean, I didn't have to work that hard. So, does it make me like I'm a stupid guy or something? No. It makes me a normal individual guy who works like everyone else. But if I do a PhD like you do a PhD, it's not impossible. But now imagine I get a PhD, and I have so much publication and so on, and I say weird things like that, you know what, God can exist with this. Just because I have a theory. It doesn't make sense to say this guy is a reputable scholar. You will say, look, he's out of his mind in his logic and argumentation. He's trying to say something which is totally not right. Listen. I don't, in fact, the logic thing they bring out, logically you can be infinite and finite at the same time. If you think that logic, I would say, no thank you, I don't buy this logic.
You can show to me why that's wrong. You can show to me why that's wrong, but you haven't done that.
Do you believe that God can be infinite and finite at the same time?
From every angle, no. In principle, no.
Let me start again. In any angle, do you believe God can be existent and existing at the same time?
No. Well, no, obviously.
Why not?
Because that defies the law of non-contradiction.
Fine. So you abide by the law of non-contradiction.
Yeah, I abide by
Do you
that.
believe God can be knowledgeable, all-knowing, and ignorant at the same time?
Yeah, those aren't contradictory.
See, now it's-
Wait. You said knowledgeable.
All
and
knowledgeable
ignorant.
means-
I'm knowledgeable and ignorant at the
Let
same
me
time.
explain what I mean. All knowledgeable means you have 100% knowledge of everything.
Yeah.
And you're 0% ignorant of anything.
Yeah.
So can you be 100% knowledgeable and 5% ignorant? A being?
Not in principle, no.
No, in any principle.
No, because you need to understand what's
No.
meant by
Hang on. Let me ask you.
You can't define terms how you want.
Let me ask you again. In any way, shape or form in your logic that you study in Oxford, can you be 100% knowledgeable in something and 5% ignorant in the same thing?
In any way, shape or form?
Yeah.
Yes. Because he's saying from every...
That's Christian logic.
This isn't Christian logic. This is basic definition. You said in any way, shape or form.
Yeah.
One way, shape or form would be if you apply different definitions. Right? Is that
Are you
not
going to
any way, shape or
redefine at one point you have
You said,
divinity and another?
no, this is the reason. When you said it in any way, shape, or form, I'm just going with what you said. You said in any way, shape, or form.
Sure.
One way to
Give an example.
obviate that problem would be to fallaciously define them the wrong way.
Now, give me an example.
Okay, so I define all knowledge as literally knowing everything, and I define ignorance as having a bicycle. Right? It's ridiculous.
Hang on. Ignorance as defining what?
As having a bicycle, something stupid, right?
No, that's not the definition. Discard it in the first
Which is
place.
literally my
When-
point.
No.
That's literally
No.
my point.
The reason why, when we talk
You're
about
missing my
knowledge,
point, Mansur.
look up, as an Oxford student, you should really be more sensible.
I am being sensible.
No,
I'm
you're
trying
not.
to show you how
Let
to
me,
take
let me
every
tell you
definition,
something.
and that's
When
how
we
you
talk
become
about
honest.
knowledge, right? Knowledge means what? What does knowledge mean?
I don't know how you define it. How do you define it? You act like that's a basic
Okay,
thing.
do I know your name? Possibly not, because I haven't asked you and you didn't tell me. Do you know my name?
Yeah, what's your name?
Yeah, Mansur.
So it's me, I'm Rob.
Nice mixing. Now, what's your name again?
Rob.
Rob, now I know your name. So in my understanding, in my knowledge base, I have got your name. Right?
What is knowledge? Exactly. You can't ask a question when you can't define it yourself. You give an example
So
of
now,
knowledge,
Rob,
not knowledge.
I am aware in my consciousness, that you are called Rob. You go by the name Rob. Now, if I was all knowledgeable being, meaning I do not have any limitation of time. I know your name from eternity to eternity. There is not a fraction of a second in time, understanding of time, that I will not know your name. That's what I mean by all knowledgeable. So I will always know your name, like I always knew your name, and I always will ever know your name.
All knowledgeable is knowing facts forever.
That name of yours, for example, in this instance, that I will always know. There will not be, when I say all the time means what? No limitation of our past, present, and future confinement within this time frame. So when I am all knowledgeable, when God is all knowledgeable of your name, Rob, there cannot be a time in the future when He will be not knowledgeable of your name. That's what I mean by all knowledgeable. Now if I ask you, can the same God know your name and then not know your name tomorrow for 30-second window? Tomorrow at 8 o'clock, He doesn't know your name. Is it possible? Is it rationally possible?
To then know my name all the time.
Having knowing your name all the time. Including
You
all
won't
the
know it
time.
tomorrow. Yeah.
And tomorrow at 8 o'clock in the morning, He doesn't know your name. Does it make sense?
What you're telling me, essentially.
So He has to know your name, right? He cannot not know your name. He can't just simply say, oh, what was your name? 8 o'clock, He says, Bob, Tom. He can't do that because He already defined by all knowing means. He knows it all the time. So that's what I mean. Can God be all knowledgeable and ignorant? The answer is no. Why? Can God be? He says, why not?
Can I explain how
Thank you.
it's possible?
Thank you.
I can explain how
Go
it's
back to Oxford.
I mean, if I can explain how it's possible, is that relevant?
Okay, can you explain why it isn't? It is possible. Can you explain why it isn't?
And he's showing why it isn't possible. And that's very obvious. He's shown that according to the law of non-contradiction, you can't have all knowledgeable and any level of ignorance at the same time. And I agree with that, unless there is a rectifying factor which then mitigates that difference.
Show us how we
So the rectifying factor would be...
So in this example, you just say God the Son.
Yeah, so no, actually, because
Give that
we're
example.
all talking about God the Son.
No, Rob.
I'm keeping it
No,
relevant.
Rob. We want to talk about Rob.
And you start with
Be fair.
Jesus and then go to me.
I'm not sure I can go to because it's not an Arab.
That's the problem.
Because God the
That's
Son...
why Christians try to avoid
God the Son
talking
is
about
not
this subject.
Christians don't try to avoid anything.
That's exactly what you're doing.
God the Son presents all the divine attributes, omniscience, omnipotence,
No, don't actually.
okay, that's God the Son, in principle, that's God the Son. God the Son, by his omnipotence, can also choose to take on an additional nature. That additional nature is a limited nature by his own free will. He does not, this nature doesn't cease to exist. It's not like when Jesus incarnated for like 2 years, God the Son just put into an existence, because that would be he always existed, but he assumed on an additional nature. That additional nature is subject to limitations by virtue of his own free will of choosing to assume that nature. Right? Now, this nature always had the omnipotence and omniscience still possessed of the attributes. There was never a time when he was ignorant. That's why, in principle, God the Son still remains omniscient. There was no contradiction. We're not asserting that God the Son, or our God the Son, in his nature just as it is, suddenly became ignorant, because that would be a logical contradiction. In the same way, we're not saying with the Trinity, for example, that God is one being in three beings, or one person in three persons, because that's a logical contradiction. We are using the same terms in different contexts, and so they have different parameters under which they fit. Therefore, it's not a contradiction.
So is it like...
You can't apply it to Rob, because Rob is not the divine person.
So is it like...
So you can't...
Let me tell you why he didn't apply. I'm not going to Rob example. Because he knows every single philosopher that he studies, any philosopher that he
Wait, I have a connection. Am I not? Is it like, okay, so I know your name forever apart from tomorrow at 8 o'clock. When it's tomorrow at 8 o'clock, I take some drugs and then I can't remember. Like, I haven't changed who I am as a person, but my
when you talk about an unknowledgeable being, knowing, affirming that he knows everything. This is an affirmation. Not everything included 8 o'clock tomorrow.
Sure, like, so I can know everything, but if I have some drugs, then it means like...
God being drugged by who? He's independent.
And I know it's not a perfect analogy.
So I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about God. So God who is all knowledgeable, at 8 o'clock, he still knows your name. You cannot say he doesn't know your name at 8 o'clock.
Okay.
Because he already knows that. That 8 o'clock is included in his own knowledge.
You're right. We agree on that.
Now, if you have a God who is dependent for everything on someone else, that God is not a perfect God. So a God that is dependent.
I'm confused between me and my nature. Sorry, I'm not God, I'm not saying that. I'm saying, between God and his nature. Because you were talking about God's
Is his nature perfect? Is his nature uncaused?
That's what I don't know what nature
So
is.
let me tell you. We agree God has to be uncaused. This is caused.
Again, that's an example.
If God, I'm sorry, I cannot really speak. You know what?
Okay, so I actually don't want to interrupt. Sorry, I don't want to.
Every principle in essential attributes of God, like omnipotence, omniscience, this is when you say you're questioning something that is essentially an essential attribute of God. Uncaused, being uncaused, not being forced into existence. Because if you say no, at one point he didn't exist, he was forced into existence. So was he eternal? Was he omnipotent? No, of course he didn't even exist. So when you question
Jesus was born as a person.
when you question the uncaused nature of God, you are saying that means it's possible God was caused. If it's possible he was caused, means at one point he was caused into existence. So that means there was something at some point he didn't exist. What was it? Because that's what you mean by caused. What are you causing to? Causing to come into existence. That's what causation means. So God by definition has to be uncaused, not brought into existence. Yes. Right. Jesus is caused, or the Trinity second member is caused by the Father, by their very dogma in their belief. He's caused, he's generated, he proceeds, he's begotten. He is caused. The father, according to the model of the monarchy, monarchical model, like you try to
So the normal
whatever, any model, the father is uncaused. So now you have a being who is uncaused, and you have someone else who is caused. They are not equal, are they? Someone who is caused and someone who is uncaused. If you say they are the same, I leave the discussion here and you go and study in Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard, whatever.
They're not the same.
They're not the same.
We've never argued that.
So if they're not the same, are they equal in their nature?
Can you be different but equal?
No.
Yes, you can.
When
There
you,
we go.
so if uncaused makes you fitting God,
Why does it make you
does a caused nature makes you fitting God?
Weird, Mansur. I'm going to head out.
Thank you.
No, I'm going to say before you leave. Okay, a couple of things. So, he's given an example. He said, why don't you worship the Bible? He's ignored the fact that the Bible is obviously none of these kind of factors. That's why we don't worship the Bible, right? It's also it came into existence at a certain point. When we say that Jesus, God the Son, the Holy Spirit was caused or received and generated, we never said there was a time zero when he didn't exist and then a time when he didn't exist. God the Son eternally exists. Exactly, eternally dependent. Now, he says, okay, look the fact that he's dependent shows that he's inferior or and he's never actually shown why dependence is a weakness. And what he does is goes back to the Bible. It's a circular argument. He has to presuppose that dependence is a weakness to make his argument.
Show me philosophically that dependence is not a weakness. What is a weakness? You know what?
Carry on, enjoy.
You are.
No, I'll be around here for a bit.
Okay, nice to meet you.
I'll chat to
Anyone who says we need to demonstrate that dependency is a weakness, someone without their mind unless they're Christian. How can you even want to show dependency and independency? They're on the same footing. If you are self-sufficient, you are not dependent. And if you are dependent, you're not self-sufficient. Do I need to demonstrate that with quantum logic?
No, it makes sense. So I'm a slow
Right,
thinker,
right.
so it takes me a while to process
So the
things.
reasons why they're arguing and questioning is, look, if I were trained in philosophy and logic, I could have just killed him just like that. Why? Because he knows that's the weakness, that I am not using the jargon that he's using. And he can only argue on the basis of, reputable scholars like the ones you mentioned this story. But we know how weak they are. Why? Because by definition, any being who is omnipotent has to be uncaused. By definition. All of them. They're all interlinked in their actions. If you are omnipotent, you cannot be caused. If you're eternal, in the beginning, you cannot be caused. You cannot be other than omnipotent. So these essential attributes go hand in hand together. So the fact that we have found a being called such a member of Trinity who is caused and dependent on the Father, by definition is not God. You can call it God, you can call this by God, some people will do. Some people will call this by God and worship Him. Some people will call Jesus God and worship Him. But it doesn't make them befitting to be God. Your heart and your mind will know a being who is dependent on someone doesn't befit to be called God.
Can I try and example it? I want to know what you're fish tank. There's a fish, it's very dependent on water. Scientists start fish. Go join the fish tank for a while, swim around, have a chat with them, see how they do. And then come back out again. Then these scientists come back out and be again. So they worship me because they were dependent on me, and then I became a fish because I'm not fishing. Does that make sense? So, I want to know what your thoughts are on that. So that is the metaphor.
So this is what happens. Jesus was God to begin with, but I'm questioning that point. Before you became a fish, I'm talking about your status before the fish. Okay. Right, at that point, you're not God to begin with. That's what I'm questioning. Because you are demonstrated in your definition as being caused and dependent on the Father, you are not God. You can call and label yourself, I have a different definition of God. One is called a nominal definition, one is called a predicative definition. You can redefine God to suit your dogmas. A Hindu can do that. Someone who's a polytheist can do that. You know, when I say God, sometimes when I I say God, that's the real God, and that's the God actually is not real God. It's by predication. No, this is all semantics. Get people confused and say actually it's God. But when you question, when you say the Son is a God by predication and Father is a God by knowing, what's the difference? There is a difference. There is a difference. By predication, for example, you can say, this man is God, but actually he's not God, but I call him God by predication because he's nice and kind. But you know, in reality, on the fundamental level, on the pragmatic level, he's not God. Likewise, on the pragmatic level, the Son cannot be in any way God. Because he doesn't have the attributes of God.
So we're the fish. How do we know the man who feeds us is God? How do you know? How do you know that? Like, I understand your definition and I agree with it. I mean, like, how do you know?
So you can say, this is how we will eliminate who can be called God and who cannot be God. Anyone who says, I'm God but I need to eat to sustain myself, I will say by definition, you are not God. You cannot be God. Some people can call you God and worship you God, but you are not really deserving to be called God. The real God who is worth deserving is the one who is one and absolutely unique and self-sufficient, independent, eternal, not produced or producing, and totally unparalleled in equality in terms of power and authority, totally different to everyone else. And that is something that you realize that yes, it makes sense. So in the Christian concept, they can bring philosophical things, do PhDs or whatever, and say, there you go, now we've somehow made but it doesn't still go away with the problem. You have belief in which something is less than God.
Yeah, I get that. That logic matters. I mean, like, so Christianity, that's not God. How do you know that your God is?
So when first we study comparatively, how do we know which scripture, which religion gives us the true guidance from God? You have to have a basic understanding of what is to begin with, and that's what we've done so far. Starting with your bike and giving an example from Christian doctrine. Okay? So we know that one deserving to be called God has to have these attributes for our deserving for worship. Just like it's not worthy for us to worship a bike, likewise it's not worthy for us to worship Jesus or the Holy Spirit and so on. But the Father, in their definition, fits within the category of being God and being worthy of worship if he has also the attributes. Conceptually, there will be no problem from our part. And that's what we say as well. This has always been the message. Christ was a prophet and a messenger. He came to tell people to worship God, who he says, my Father and your Father. And he says, my God and your God. So yes, we agree with that. Yes, this is what God always says, worship this being holy, who is of this nature. So we say, this God sends us revelation to prophets and messengers. And we look and examine them, and you can actually say, okay, this is the guidance from God. Quran, we say, is the final book from God, giving us that guidance about who He is and what we're supposed to do in that relationship. And the Quran describes, in fact, you were surprised what I said, things which we thought philosophically. Chapter in the Quran, chapter 112 Quran Ikhlas, which means Quran, 140 chapters in 712. Say, He is Allah once. One and He is Samad, self-sufficient master. All he word Samad. He doesn't produce others, neither is he produced or generated or begotten. So not himself doing production or generation, or not himself being produced.
He didn't make.
No, not make.
He himself doesn't produce or beget.
Doesn't beget,
And
he
he
doesn't
himself
have
is not
children.
begotten.
Doesn't have children. Doesn't have children.
Ambient means God himself is not born or begotten or generated or preceded, and he doesn't do that himself. Because
He made us
creation.
He creates.
But himself,
He doesn't beget.
begetting is an archaic English word, means siring a child. Right? When a father has a child, a relationship of physical, that's begetting.
Using this logic straight away.
So God is not begotten from someone else, neither does he beget. And وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ, there's none to him co-equal or comparable in any way, shape, or form. This is only 4 statements, 4 ayat of God, all of them are intellect, describing the essential nature of God. Yeah, absolute oneness, being totally sufficient. Unique chapter, the whole chapter.
This is just the Quran is chapters. Some chapters are big chapters which contains stories and things like that. And some chapters, there are some, not this one, but some chapters are very concise. Like this one talks about literally the creed of Islam. This one summarizes what is Islam. This verse talks about same Allah is one, and his nature, one and his essence, no one similar to him. That describes the one, meaning there is no second, there is no third, it's the one. Allah Samad, meaning as well as Samad, it has a very unique term in Arabic, meaning that all the creation relies on him, and he is not relying on no one. Meaning, he's sufficient for anything, but everything relies on him. Everything relies on him. Not just only sufficient. In fact, on top of that, he's sufficient for all the creation as well. That all the creation, they depend on him in their existence, in their sustain, in everything. Then Allah has described this about his existence. That he wasn't devoted to him, he wasn't related to God and goddess, so he wasn't begotten, nor he begets, he doesn't produce children. And there is no someone similar to him or equal to him in any sort of form. So this kind of concise chapter about the whole thing, basically a simple, concise, to the point.
If you were to examine this logically, if he was one, then must be by himself,
I think basically
he cannot be born from others. If he begets someone else, then he will not be unique anymore. Someone else like him. And he will not be one anymore, he will be two. And if he's not begotten, not begetting, independent of provision, and there be anyone like him. He will be totally unique. No parallel. Last verse says, there's no co-equal whatsoever anyone. So this chapter is a very strong chapter describing the purity of faith about the very details. I mean, directly engages with the Christian belief. Directly.
yeah, like it's written. That's wrong.
Yeah. So to give you an example, when they talk about I want you to ponder on this. If you have
Ponder.
you see this? Now we want to lift this up. God, the Father, is omnipotent by their definition. And they also agree that God the Son is omnipotent by definition. They say also omnipotent.
Christianity is based on 3
Sorry. Both all powerful. So God the Father wants to lift this up to this height, 1 meter. And God the Son wants to lift this up 2 meters high. At the same time on the same object. Where is this going to go? Moses. Then none of them are omnipotent. None of them are all powerful because they fail to lift it up exactly where they want it. So 1 meter or 2 meters, that's the option.
Okay.
So where is it going to? Because they are equal to their will. If they have no will, different wills, then how do you say one is fine? So one of them will lift up 1 meter, other one 2 meters. Yeah. Imagine now, it's up to them. That makes the Son not you should fail to lift it up too high. And if it goes up there, the Father is not devoted. It You cannot have more than one omnipotent. In reality, no more than one. It's like having a car with two driving wheels, two independent driving wheels next to each other, and they will take one to the north, one to the south. Who's the car going to go? This is why Quran says, لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا. Had there been more than one God, there will be corruption and ruin and chaos. It's not going to happen. Universe, one God says rain, another God says sunshine, thunder. The fact that we still following a particular, it says one is in control. We say one being, one God, one absolute being is in control of all these things. All these Planck's constants, the gravitational constants, all these constants are so precise. Who's maintaining them? One controller. If there are more than one omnipotent, omniscient, eternal being, there will be conflict of will. You can't just say, oh no, they work together. Why would they work together? Why would they have to compromise? Because you have to be separate. You are eternal. You're self-sufficient. You don't listen to us. Okay, I'll listen to you. I'm not going to listen to a I'm compromising my will.
Because this one is true,
There is adding
that one is true.
I'm adding to this. You know why God emphasizes about He doesn't beget? And there's emphasis in this. And Allah said in the Quran as well. When Allah criticized the Christians, that when they described that God has a son, that God, He said, their statement is so severe to the extent even the heavens will crumble because of their statement, of that evil statement. They accuse God of having a son. Why is that? Just perfect for us as a human being to have children, have sons. Why? Why do we need to have children? What's the point? Because we are weak. What's the weakness? Our weakness that we desire to have children to continue our legacy, continue our lineage. Because we know we're going to die at one point. So our children will continue this, this genetic, you could say, reproduction from us. And as well, we wanted to continue our legacy. We wanted to our name to be remembered. All of these things, all in the old times, they have children to help them to God be working in the field to take care of us. All of these things. God doesn't die, so He doesn't need something to continue His legacy after His death. So He doesn't die. God Himself is all powerful, doesn't need no one to help Him. That's why when they say He sent the Son to do the sacrifice in order for them to do the it's the same thing as the same example to lift up this. Because God, He couldn't, either the Father was not able to lift up this stick to this level, so He sent the Son to pick it up to this level and then He will pick it up to it. Meaning that each one is not so powerful, the Father according to this, or the Son according to the Christian faith. They're not all powerful, they're not all powerful to do that, to forgive the people. So the Father has to send His Son, or the Son has to die in order so the Father will forgive them, which totally doesn't make sense. If God is powerful, simple as that.
Given you another example, even on a philosophical level, to see how rationally, what it makes sense to you. I'm not going to...
I'm a slow thinker.
You reflect on your own thought. Pleasure speaking to you. We'll talk again.
And as well, study more, learn more about Islam. And as well, there's a final thing that to prove that as well Islam is the truth as well. That by studying the Quran. That's one of the things I urge you to do. We don't have a hidden agenda. We do it to deliver. This is the Quran. Study and read the Quran. And you will see the Quran, this amazing book that guided 1.8 billion people on earth. And still guiding people, and still people coming to Islam, accepting Islam, even during this severe time, but because they found the guidance of the Quran, it opened their heart. So I would advise you and all the audience to open your heart to accept the truth, and open your mind to follow the truth. As simple as that. And see in the Quran and see even there are statements in the Quran that those are facts. It cannot be said by someone living in a desert for 1400 years. How come this prophet messenger who never read and write is able to say these wisdom which is yet to be discovered 1400 years after his death? That's why I urge you, brothers, study and learn, and then you will see that this is the guidance of the Quran. Just open your heart to accept it. As simple as that. Yeah?
Very much for telling me what you guys
No problem. All right, take care. No problem. Take care. All right, Mansur.